I didn't think anything of it at first, and that's the part that bothers me the most now. Because if I had trusted that feeling earlier, if I had just listened to it instead of brushing it off like I always do, I probably would have left before things got as far as they did. But when you're working night shifts, especially alone, you get used to strange noises, small inconsistencies, things not feeling quite right, and you learn to ignore them, because if you didn't, you'd never make it through a single shift without losing your mind. That's exactly why I stayed, why I convinced myself everything was normal, even when it clearly wasn't. Even when deep down I already knew something was wrong long before I could prove it. The job was simple: overnight security at a storage facility about 30 minutes outside the city, surrounded by empty roads and fields. I took it because I needed the money, same reason anyone takes a job like that. Not because it's ideal, but because it's available. At first, it really was as boring as people say. I'd show up at 10 p.m., grab the flashlight, and start my rounds. Checking doors, walking aisles, logging timestamps. For the first week, it was just silence and long, empty corridors. The shelving seemed to stretch further at night, and the constant low hum of ventilation and electricity filled the air. I got comfortable fast. By my 8th shift, I wasn't even thinking about the job. Headphones in one ear, coffee in hand. That's when it started. Not with a loud noise, but with something so small I almost didn't even register it. I noticed a door at the far end of the west corridor slightly open. Not wide, just enough that it wasn't fully shut. I knew I had checked that door less than an hour earlier, and it had been closed, locked like always. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the latch slipped, maybe someone from day shift forgot something. Every explanation except the truth. I pushed the door open and shined my flashlight inside, expecting to see something, but there was nothing. Just empty metal shelves. I checked the corners, the back wall, even behind the shelving units. I told myself I was being paranoid. I closed the door, made sure it latched properly this time, and continued my round. But about 40 minutes later, when I came back through that same corridor, the door was open again. Exactly the same way. I stopped dead in my tracks. There was no explanation. I had checked the latch. I knew it had been secure. It meant movement. It meant someone could be inside the building with me right now. I felt that slow, creeping tension start to build. I pushed it open, scanning every corner, every shadow, expecting something to be there. But again, nothing. Completely empty. That's when something shifted in my head. The lack of anything there didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. I thought I saw something at the far end of the corridor. Not clearly, just movement, something shifting out of view. I stood there, completely still, listening, trying to pick up any sound. Footsteps, breathing, anything. But there was nothing. I didn't call it in, I didn't leave. I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired. I went home and tried to forget. But the next night, when I came back, something was already waiting for me. Something small, something easy to miss. Right there on the floor in the middle of the corridor, there was a single object sitting there. Something that didn't belong. A glove, a dark work glove, slightly damp, slightly dirty, like it had been used recently. I realized something that made my stomach drop instantly. I was the only one scheduled for the night shift that week. That glove wasn't old. It was fresh, recent, like someone had dropped it not long before I got there. Something was inside that building with me. Something that had already been there before I even arrived. As I stood back up, I heard something behind me. A small, deliberate sound like a step, soft, controlled, close enough that I knew instantly. I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't turn around right away, and that's not because I was trying to be brave or calculated. It was because something instinctive understood that the moment I confirmed what was behind me, everything would change. I stood there, staring down the empty corridor, realizing just how quiet the building had become. Not the usual quiet, but a heavier kind of silence, like the building itself was holding its breath. I could feel my heart starting to beat harder, not fast, but heavy, like every pulse was louder than it should be. Then I heard it again, another step, softer this time, controlled, like the person making it didn't want to be heard. That was the moment I turned, slowly, my flashlight rising with my hand sweeping across the space behind me. Expecting something to be there, but there was nothing, just the same empty corridor stretching behind me. For a second, I just stood there, breathing slowly, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. But that explanation didn't hold, not with the glove in my hand or the door opening twice the night before. I took a step back, scanning every corner again, moving the beam of my flashlight more carefully than before. That's when I noticed something. One of the overhead lights at the far end of the corridor was out. I knew for a fact that light had been working. Now it was just a patch of shadow that felt deeper. Part of me didn't want to go near it, but another part, the part that needed answers, pushed me forward. The closer I got, the more I realized the shelves near that section looked slightly different, moved out of alignment. I reached the edge of the darkened area, the beam of my flashlight scanning every gap between the shelves. That's when I saw it, something that shouldn't have been there, tucked between two rows of shelving. It was a shape, low to the ground. My light focused on it, and that's when it clicked. It was a sleeping bag, dark and worn, and right next to it, a backpack and empty water bottles. Cold realization hit instantly. This wasn't someone breaking in. This was someone staying, living in this space. This wasn't a random spot. From here, there was a clear line of sight toward the main area where I spend my shift. Whoever had been staying there didn't just pick a place to hide, they picked a place to watch. I felt that instinctive awareness again, that feeling that I wasn't alone, that I was being observed right now. Then I heard it again, but this time it was movement, faster, something shifting quickly out of view. My heart jumped immediately, that sharp spike of adrenaline hitting all at once. I took a step back. Someone was inside the building with me. Someone who knew the layout and where the cameras didn't reach. I hadn't just found their space. I had walked directly into it. If they were watching, they knew exactly where I was. I kept backing up until I reached the main corridor, my mind racing now, trying to decide what to do next. I reached for my radio, my hand hovering over it for a second before I pressed the button, ready to call it in. Before I could say a word, the radio crackled to life on its own, a burst of static cutting through the silence. Through that static, I heard something that made my blood run cold instantly, a faint, distorted whisper. It wasn't coming from outside. It was close, too close, like it was right there on the same frequency. The static shifted slightly, forming into something deliberate, controlled, and directed. "You're not supposed to be here." For a second after that voice came through the radio, I just stood there, completely still. Every option suddenly felt wrong, like any movement I made would only confirm something to whoever was already inside with me. I slowly lowered the radio from my mouth without pressing the button, my eyes scanning the corridor again. There was nothing, no footsteps, no shifting, just that same heavy silence pressing in from all sides. The voice hadn't sounded panicked or aggressive. It had sounded calm, almost matter-of-fact. It was a correction. Whoever was out there didn't see me as a problem, they saw me as something out of place. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. I needed distance, I needed light, I needed to think clearly. I started walking back toward the front of the building, toward the small security office near the entrance. As I moved, I kept my flashlight aimed ahead, checking every aisle and every shadow that could hide someone. Everything looked exactly the same as it always did, empty and quiet. But now I knew that empty didn't mean safe. I reached the security office, stepped inside quickly, and locked the door without thinking, listening for anything behind me. I turned toward the monitors, and that's when things got worse. The screens weren't showing what they should have been. The cameras covering the west corridor were either completely black or filled with static. They were dead. This wasn't random or a coincidence. It was targeted, intentional, like someone had disabled them to stay hidden. I reached for the keyboard, pulling up the playback system to see when the cameras went out. I scrubbed it back through the footage. Everything looked normal until I reached the time the door first opened. Without any warning, the door shifted slightly and opened. My stomach dropped instantly because there was no one there. No shadow, no movement, nothing pushing it. It just opened like something was there that the camera couldn't see. In the reflection of the monitor, just behind me, there was movement. A figure standing just outside the office door. I couldn't even turn. My brain was trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew should be there. They had seen my routines, my patterns, and now I had found something I wasn't supposed to find. I turned around quickly, my flashlight snapping toward the door, but the space outside was empty, completely empty. I stepped back inside and locked the door. This time it didn't feel like protection, it felt like containment. On the entrance monitor, I could see myself standing in the doorway, but the timing was wrong. I wasn't there anymore. That version of me slowly turned its head directly toward where the monitors were. Toward me. Whatever was in that building wasn't just watching me anymore. It was learning how to be me. For a few seconds, I couldn't move at all. Not because I didn't want to, but because my brain was trying to process something it didn't have a framework for. Something that didn't fit into any kind of normal explanation because I was standing there in front of the monitors, fully aware of where I was, what I was doing, and yet on the screen, I could see myself still standing in the doorway. Completely still, like I had never moved, and the longer I stared at it, the more wrong it felt, not just because of the mismatch, but because of the way that version of me was standing. The posture wasn't quite right, the angle of the shoulders, the stillness. It wasn't how a person stands when they're just pausing. It was too perfect, too controlled, like it was holding a position instead of naturally existing. And I felt that slow, rising dread settle deeper in my chest as I watched, waiting for it to correct itself. Waiting for the feed to catch up, for something to make sense again, but it didn't. Instead, that version of me moved first. Not me, not the one standing in the room, but the one on the screen, and it turned its head slightly more. Just enough that I could see its face at a different angle, and even though it was technically my face, there was something off. Something I couldn't fully explain, but immediately recognized as wrong. The expression was neutral, completely flat, but not in a normal way. It looked like an imitation of neutrality, like something trying to replicate a human expression without fully understanding it. And I felt my breath catch as I took a step back instinctively, my eyes still locked on the screen. And then slowly, that version of me raised its hand, not quickly, not naturally, but in a controlled, almost deliberate motion, and pressed it flat against the doorframe in the camera's view, and I realized something in that moment that made everything feel worse than anything before, because I hadn't done that. I had never placed my hand there. Which meant whatever was on that screen wasn't just delayed footage, it wasn't replaying something I had already done. It was doing something on its own, something separate from me entirely, and I felt that realization hit hard. Enough to force me to look away for a second, just to break that connection, just to ground myself in something real. And I turned toward the actual door behind me, half expecting to see something there again, some confirmation that this was still physical. But the door was exactly as I had left it, closed, locked, nothing unusual. And that should have reassured me, but it didn't. Because now the problem wasn't just what was out there. It was what I was seeing in here. And I turned back toward the monitors slowly, almost reluctantly, because part of me didn't want to look again. Didn't want to see what it might be doing now, but I forced myself to, because not knowing felt worse. And when my eyes landed on the screen again, the doorway was empty, completely empty, no version of me, no movement. Nothing at all, like whatever had been there had already moved on, and I stood there for a second trying to process that shift. Trying to understand what it meant, because if it wasn't me, and it wasn't just a recording, then it had gone somewhere. It had left that position, and the thought of that, the idea that whatever had been imitating me was now somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't see hit me in a way that made my chest tighten again, and I took another step back instinctively. My eyes scanning the rest of the monitors quickly now, checking each feed, each camera, looking for any sign of movement. But most of the screens were still useless, static, or black, and the few that were working showed nothing out of place. Just empty aisles, quiet corridors, the same still environment I had been moving through all night. And for a second, I considered staying there, locking myself in that office and waiting until morning, calling someone. Because whatever was happening was beyond anything I could handle on my own, but that thought didn't last long. Because something else occurred to me, something that made staying there feel just as dangerous as leaving. If whatever this was could appear on the cameras without me being there, if it could mimic me, move independently, then there was no guarantee it couldn't get into that room, no guarantee that the door or the lock would actually stop it. And that realization pushed me into motion again, because staying in one place suddenly felt like the worst possible option. And I reached for my radio again, this time pressing the button without hesitation, calling for anyone on the line. Security, supervisor, anyone who might respond, but all I got back was static, just empty noise. and I lowered the radio slowly, my grip tightening because now I was completely cut off, no communication, no visibility. And something inside that space moving in ways I couldn't predict, and I knew then that I had to leave. Not just move around, but get out of the building entirely because whatever this was, it was escalating, getting closer. More direct, more aware, and I stepped toward the door, unlocking it slowly, my flashlight already raised, ready to move. The second it opened, I pulled it open just enough to check the corridor outside, the beam cutting through the darkness. Sweeping left, then right, and everything looked empty, just like before, no movement, no sound. And I stepped out carefully, closing the door behind me, not locking it this time, because I didn't want to trap myself again. And I started moving toward the front entrance, faster now, not running, but not slow either. My focus fixed on getting out, on putting distance between me and whatever this had become, and for a few seconds, everything felt almost normal again. Just the sound of my footsteps, the steady beam of my flashlight, the familiar layout of the building guiding me forward. And I almost believed, just for a moment, that I could make it out without anything else happening, but that feeling didn't last. Because as I turned the final corner toward the main entrance, I stopped instantly, my body reacting before my brain processed. Because standing there, right in front of the exit doors, exactly where I needed to go, was a figure, perfectly still, facing away from me, wearing the same uniform I was wearing, the same posture, the same build. And I felt that cold realization hit instantly, because even before it turned around, I already knew. I wasn't the only version of me anymore. I didn't move, not forward, not back, not even a shift in my weight, because the second I saw it standing there in front of the exit, wearing the same uniform, the same posture, the same exact stillness I had just seen on the monitor, something in me understood that this wasn't just another moment I could push through. This was the moment everything had been building toward. For a few seconds, the only thing I could hear was my own breathing, slow but heavy, like my body was trying to stay controlled. The figure didn't react at all, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me. Just stood there, facing the door like it was waiting for something or someone. I forced myself to look closer, to focus on the details. Because if this was real, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The more I looked, the worse it felt, because everything about it was correct, down to the smallest details and the creases in the uniform. The placement of the flashlight clipped at the side, even the slight tilt of the head that matched the way I usually stood. That's when the realization hit harder. It wasn't just copying me, it knew me. It had been watching long enough to replicate things. This had been happening for longer than tonight, longer than the door opening, longer than anything I had noticed. I took a small step backward, just enough to create space, and the moment I did, the figure moved. Not fast, not aggressively, just a slight shift of its head like it had registered the movement. And then it began to turn. I felt my chest tighten, every second stretching longer than it should have, because I already knew what I was going to see. When it finally faced me, it was my face, exactly my face, but wrong. The features were identical, but the expression wasn't natural. It was like a paused version of an expression, something held in place rather than felt. Its eyes were locked directly on me, not blinking. Standing there, looking at it, I realized this wasn't something hiding from me anymore. It was confronting me directly, intentionally. Then it took a step toward me, slow, controlled, and I reacted instantly. Stepping back again, my flashlight raising slightly. It stopped when I stopped, mirroring me perfectly. I understood the pattern. It wasn't just copying me physically, it was responding to me. It was learning, adapting, becoming more precise with every second. I forced myself to speak. "What are you?" Slowly, its mouth moved, forming words in a way that looked slightly delayed, like it was replicating the motion rather than producing it. When it finally spoke, the voice was mine, exactly mine, but empty in a way that made it worse. Routine confirmed. They weren't random words, they were a statement. It had been watching me, learning my patterns, my behavior, and now it could replace me. If it could be me, then what did that make me? I took another step back, my heart starting to beat faster now. It stepped forward again, matching me, not letting me get too close to the exit, not letting me create too much space either. I moved suddenly, stepping sharply to the side, trying to get around it, trying to break the symmetry it had been maintaining. I pushed toward the door, my focus locked on the handle, but just as I reached out, something grabbed my wrist, firm, controlled. I froze instantly. It wasn't the figure in front of me. It was another hand, identical to mine, coming from my side. Standing just behind me now, close enough that I hadn't even heard it approach, was another version, same uniform, same face. This wasn't just one thing anymore. It was more than one, and they weren't just watching or copying. They were surrounding me. The air in this corridor is cold, sterile, and smells faintly of ozone. I have been walking for what feels like hours through this labyrinth. There is a rhythm to the silence here, a pulse that matches my own heartbeat, but then the rhythm breaks. A sudden weight stops me. I didn't scream, I didn't even gasp. It was as if some deep, buried part of my mind had been expecting this physical manifestation of dread. I turned my head slowly, the movement feeling like it takes an eternity. Standing right there, inches away, is a face I know too well. He looks like me, he breathes like me, but his eyes are like glass, perfectly still, watching me with a terrifying, calculated calm. I look ahead and see another one. The first double. He is standing there, blocking my path, wearing the same dark jacket, the same exhaustion. I pull my arm back, trying to break the hold. But the grip is like stone. It doesn't tighten, and it doesn't loosen. It just is. My voice comes out as a dry whisper, barely audible in the sterile air. What do you want? Why are you doing this? The first double tilts his head. It is a mechanical, precise movement. When he speaks, the voice is mine, but layered like an echo. Correction, that is the only word he says. It vibrates through the air, sounding like 100 versions of me speaking at once. Correction of what? I am a person, not a mistake. I have a life, a name, a memory. You can't just label me. The one behind me leans in. I can feel the coldness of his skin near my ear. Pattern inconsistency, he whispers. It sounds like a verdict. I try to move sideways to find a gap in their formation, but they move with me. Every step I take, they mirror with haunting perfection. I look up, high in the corner, a security camera swivels. It follows us. No, it follows me. It has been watching all along. They haven't just been following me. They have been studying me. Every habit, every flaw, every unique spark of my identity recorded on digital tape. How long? I asked them. How long have you been waiting for me to fail the pattern? How long have you been standing in the shadows? Both of them respond at the exact same moment. Sufficient duration. The sound is deafening, a chorus of my own voice echoing through the hall. I stop resisting. The weight in my chest isn't fear anymore. It's the heavy realization that I am no longer necessary to my own life. I look at the version of me in front of me. He is cleaner, steadier, more efficient. And me? What happens to the original? He leans in, his breath cold against my skin, redundant. That one word is the end of everything. The light begins to fade. The pattern is corrected. The redundancy is removed. I'm just a shadow now, watching someone else live my life in the light. After it said that word, redundant, everything went quiet in a way that felt final. Not like the silence from before where something could still change, but the kind where the outcome has already been decided. For a second, I didn't fight, didn't pull away, didn't even try to move because there was nothing left to test. I already knew what this was, what they were doing, and what it meant for me. The two of them stood there on either side, perfectly still again, like they were waiting for something else now. I realized then that whatever system this was, I was no longer the active part of it. I had already served my purpose just by being there, by being observed, learned, copied. I forced myself to look at them one more time, really look, because I needed to find some flaw, some imperfection. But the longer I looked, the more I understood that there wasn't going to be one. The details were too exact. The posture, the breathing, even the small unconscious shifts they make, they were all there, all replicated perfectly. That realization settled in deeper than anything else had, because it meant this wasn't just imitation anymore. It was completion. And I felt the grip on my wrist loosen slightly, not releasing me, but changing like it was just maintaining contact. The one in front of me stepped back, just a single step, creating space between us. For a moment, nothing happened, just the three of us standing there in that quiet corridor. Slowly, the one behind me let go completely, its hand dropping away from my wrist without resistance. I didn't move because I didn't understand whether it was a test or whether they were expecting something from me. The one in front of me turned away, not acknowledging me at all, just turning toward the exit doors. The one behind me did the same, stepping past me without touching me again, moving in sync with the other. I felt something shift. The attention that had been focused on me was gone, like I had been processed and set aside. I turned slowly, my eyes following them toward the doors, and I felt that hollow realization settle in fully now. They weren't stopping me from leaving. They just didn't need to anymore. The first one reached the door and pulled it open without hesitation, the cold air from outside pushing in slightly. The first one stepped aside to allow the other one to move forward, and the second one walked out into the darkness. I understood what I was seeing, which one was leaving and which one was staying. The first one followed a second later, stepping through the door as well, both moving into the empty space beyond. I stood there, staring at the open doorway, the silence settling back into the space. I could still see them outside, faintly, moving across the lot, but there was only one of them now, not two. Just one figure walking away, steady, natural, exactly the way I would walk. I stepped forward slowly, drawn toward the doorway, because I needed to confirm what my mind was already telling me. I stopped, my hand resting lightly against the frame, and I looked out into the darkness, watching the figure move farther away. The closer I looked, the more certain I became. The way it moved, the rhythm of its steps, it was exactly right. There had never been two of them walking out of that building. There had only ever been one version complete enough to leave. The rest were just steps in the process. I stood there until the figure disappeared completely into the darkness, until there was nothing left to see. The building behind me felt empty again, silent, exactly the way it had felt at the beginning of the night. I finally stepped outside slowly, my eyes scanning the distance, but there was nothing there anymore. I told myself that I was still here, still in control, still the same person who had walked into that building. But as I turned and looked back at the glass doors, at my reflection staring back at me, something didn't feel right. Just a small, subtle detail, the kind you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen this exact image before, not in a mirror, but on a screen, delayed slightly off. I never actually saw which one of us stayed behind, and I have no way of knowing if I was the one that walked out. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare.